the whole for City of Duval. This is Tuesday, May 19th at 5:33. We have three main items this evening. The first one is City Attorney Services. The second is Flood Insurance Rate Map. And the third is the coronavirus update from our emergency manager. For the good of the order, let's start there. Any council members have anything for the good of the order? Michelle, go ahead. And then Matt and Diane.
So I wanted to give an update on my Sound Cities meeting that I attended through Zoom on Wednesday. There was one item that we approved in an emergency. They considered it an emergency. We didn't want to wait till a whole month until the next meeting. And I know some of the other council members were a little concerned doing it without going to their council first. So I wanted to kind of at least share this with you that that they are going to recommend that this be approved by the board, the Sound Cities Association board, but it's a proclamation of a commitment to an inclusive community that rejects stigma and bias related to the COVID-19. So I can forward you the proclamation. I'm sure the mayor's probably maybe had a chance to look at it, I'm not sure, but there are some other cities that have adopted this resolution. Bellevue, Burien, Redmond, Renton, SeaTac. So it's something that we'll want to talk about, I guess, as a council, but I will forward it on to you. And I also wanted to kind of briefly share with you some of the things that I heard during this Sound Cities meeting from other cities. There were a lot of cities that are really having huge shortfalls. Kirkland had has a $6 million shortfall. They're working on a hiring freeze, early retirement to prevent layoffs. Burien has a $4 million that they're working on in budget cuts. Mercer Island is $2 million. Bothell, $5 million shortfall. They're starting to see crimes increasing in Bothell. Enumclaw commented that domestic violence is increasing. Issaquah is cutting their budget 20%. A lot of cities are canceling summer events and tree lightings. There were probably 2 or 3 cities that are like us that aren't having the same shortfalls because they're not as relying on sales tax as much. So they, it was interesting to talk to them and kind of hear, what they're doing currently. But there was one city that actually said that they had an increase in sales tax because everybody's home and they're all shopping locally. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of, I just wanted to share what I was hearing from other cities. So that's my report from the PIC meeting.
Jill, thank you for that. It is interesting to see what the others. Now you're sending out the that email or the attachment on the bias, and is there a timeline for that? Is there something that needs to be signed or supported by a certain date?
Yes, I can answer that. The board meets tomorrow. So if council can get it and have a discussion under council reports tonight in the meeting, that would be great because we are voting on it as a board tomorrow.
Great.
And the flip side of that is, thank you, Councilmember Hope, for bringing it up. Other cities are doing those resolutions, and I think especially as our community demographics continue to change, it takes no time at all to get one of those, to basically copy another city's resolution, Duvalize it, and get it on the next agenda if the council wants to approve it as a group. So if you guys want to do that, it's easy to do. We're happy to get it done.
Councilmember Naplin?
Could we get a copy of that resolution? So if we're going to discuss it at the council meeting here in an hour or so, if we can just get an email copy, or
I can send it to you right now. It's going to come with a 33-page attachment, but it's on page 20. It starts on page 23, and the proclamation is just one page. Okay. I think it's probably page 25, so I'll send it to you right now.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Matt, I think Councilmember Iyer had his hand up.
Actually, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. And Councilmember Brudnicki.
I just wanted to say that when I have a question, because I still have not figured out where the question button is, I'm going to be using this.
Ah,
Okay. So if you see this, I have a question.
okay. Thank you so much. Other council members, anything for the good of the order or staff?
I wanted to let you guys know Steve DiGiulio is having issues getting in, so he's going to try and just call in because he can't seem to get the link to work for him. So I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Great. Well, seeing no other hands up and waiting for Mr. DiGiulio, we can go ahead and start our first item, which is City Attorney Services General Municipal Law Contract. This really has two parts in my mind. One is there's getting the contract itself laid out. We would be doing that for any law firm. And while it is a negotiated item with the law firm, so everybody agrees on the contract, getting the layout of the contract is important. So that's almost separate. And then the second part is certainly the selection of a firm for legal services. One of the more important things we do in our jobs with the mayor and council and staff. And so we want to make sure that we get it right and everybody's comfortable with it. With that, this evening, we are fortunate to have Eileen with us. Eileen was here at our last meeting and I felt bad I didn't introduce her. But she would be our principal attorney with Madrona, which is the one that was recommended. And I just wanted an opportunity with all of council here to be able to introduce her and have Eileen say a few words. And if council has any direct questions, welcome to ask questions as well. I see Steve is on now. Steve, can you hear us okay?
Oh, he popped off.
Hi, Steve. Can you hear us okay, Steve?
I can now. I was waiting in the green room for my invitation to be accepted. And I was told that there was another meeting in progress. So I exited that meeting and entered this meeting. So Jody helped me through the process. Thank you. So here I am.
Great. Well, welcome. Steve, we're just in the process of introducing Eileen with Madrona Law. Eileen, I'm going to turn it over to you and just let you say a few words, and we'll see if council has any questions they wanted to ask this evening.
Well, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, council, for having me here tonight and for really the opportunity to present my qualifications to you and to be able to express our continued interest in serving the city of Duval. I know you know Anne Marie really well, but I'm really glad to get this opportunity to present my qualifications and my background, and then to answer any questions that you may have about my experience or about our position on the contract. So like Mike said, my name is Eileen Kiefer. I am with Madrona Law Group. I have been licensed to practice law since 2007. I practiced in Texas for about a decade, representing local governments there. I performed both city attorney services while I was there, and then I also performed a lot of special counsel work on behalf of large coalitions of cities. That was a really interesting and really great experience because I got the chance to work with several different types, all different types of cities, really. We represented teeny tiny towns, we represented huge metropolises, and then everything in between. And that experience was really great because I got to be able to see the patterns of, obviously you can tell that the big differences in issues between very tiny towns and huge metropolises, but you'd also be surprised at the kinds of issues that came up time and time again. It really helped me figure out, okay, what are the things that cities usually see, and what kind of services do cities universally need? I moved to Washington in 2016, and since practicing in Washington, with the exception of a little pro bono work, I've only represented cities and towns, local governments. And it's been a similar experience to Texas, where we represent very small municipalities. We represent large municipalities, and then everybody in between, which is, again, a lot of fun because you get to see the full range of issues. I think the experience that's probably the most relevant to the city of Duval is my recent experience with the city of North Bend. That's how I met Steve DiGiulio, was working there. I worked with them in 2017, 2018, 2019, and then the beginning of this year. I think that they have a lot in common with Duval, and a lot of their issues are the same types of issues that Duval is currently facing. Duval is a smallish city with a small town feel that is experiencing rapid growth, rapid development. And with all of the changes that that brings, that's a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities. You've got increased workload on staff. You have the public that have a myriad of opinions on the development. Some will be, opposed to it, to any development. Some will be very supportive of it. Others just have very distinct ideas about what they think that growth should look like and what they think the city of Duval should feel like as it grows. Learned from North Bend a lot of the tools that are available to cities in managing that kind of growth and shaping the kind of growth to make it the kind of growth that the city wants to see. Did work with a lot of development agreements, overlay districts, other types of tools to really ensure that the growth there was really fitting the feel of the town. Additionally, as your public works director can tell you, I have quite a bit of experience on utility issues. It's actually what I'm known for. So I'm used to working with water utilities, wastewater utilities, drainage. You guys don't have electric utilities. I've got experience there, but just the full spectrum of utilities, both on the consumer side as well as the utility provider side. And then finally, I have learned too from being a city attorney that you have to be ready for anything. You guys handle all sorts of questions, and some days you will have questions walk through the door that you would have never imagined in a million years. But that's kind of what's fun about this job, is you have to be ready for anything. You have to be ready to think on your toes. And some of the strangest questions I've ever gotten have been like the most fun to research, because then you get to dig into something new, something different, and get to learn a little something that you didn't know before. So that's a recap of really my experience. I want to share a little bit about my philosophy on city representation, and then I'll see if you guys have any questions. One thing that I want to stress is that I view the city attorney as being a member of a team, and not the most important member of a team, just a member of the team. I am a consultant that brings information for your consideration. Council, you guys handle all the policy work, and so what you would be relying on me on is to bring you the best information I can so that you guys can make a reasoned decision, and knowing that you have the benefit of the best information to underlie your decision. My approach is going to be to give you options when there are options. The law is sometimes black and white, often it's gray, often there's a reasonable range of options. If you have alternatives, I'm going to lay those out for you, and I'm also going to present the associated risks that go along with those alternatives. I would welcome communication. I have, with my councils, I regularly communicate with them. I would be very accessible. I would be happy to take phone calls, emails, meet with you on Zoom. That's just my regular practice, is that, council and staff and administration need to be able to have access to me to be able to get the information that, again, you guys need to make your decisions. And then finally, I am not one to shoot from the hip. What I can promise you is that if you select me, I will tell you when I don't know the answer to a question, and then I will tell you, I'm going to research that, I'm going to look into that, and I'm going to get back to you. Shooting from the hip just doesn't do my clients any bit of good. You guys need accurate information. You need the best information I can give you. And so my approach is to just be really upfront with my clients and tell them when I don't know something, and then to get back with them with a well-reasoned and well-researched information. With that, I will stop talking. I appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you today, and I would welcome any questions you guys have about me or about, the contract that's before you.
Well, Eileen, thank you. We really hadn't talked to Eileen this afternoon and asked if she would mind if I introduced her and letting council ask questions. I had the opportunity on the panel to ask for 45 minutes questions, but I thought it was so important. That relationship with an individual is really key at any law firm, and we've had the opportunity to get to know Anne Marie and work with her. So I'll just ask, are there any questions from council members? Anything you'd like to ask Eileen? I don't see any hands up. Councilmember Iyer.
Hi. Is there anything in this contract that would preclude reduction in hours in terms of not always having a lawyer present at all council meetings?
We could, the contract doesn't speak to the exact number of council meetings that an attorney would show up at. It is, I believe it's at the direction from the city. So it says usually, I believe, or typically one council meeting per month. I'm trying to get it in front of me right now. But I believe it, if you guys wanted more or less attendance at council meetings, that's certainly within the scope of the contract as it's written right now. Yeah, if you look at page 2, it's Exhibit A, specification city attorney. It says the city attorney attends normally assigned city council meetings. And then it says typically one meeting per month. And so it says that a city attorney is expected to attend the normally assigned meetings, but unless they're excused by the mayor or their designee. So again, that's flexible. The council, the contract, has flexibility there. So again, if you needed more representation, less representation at council meetings, that contract allows for that flexibility.
Okay, just to follow up to that, I think that's what I thought I saw, but I just want to confirm that. And then the second thing that I wanted to check with in terms of the pricing wasn't not pricing, but the billing wasn't associated with a number of hours. It was a straight per hour rate, correct?
It's a la carte. So you guys, you're paying for only what you need. No flat fees.
Okay, thank you.
Other council members with questions? Michelle Hogue.
I feel like there could be more questions down the road. I know that Steve DiGiulio sent an update tonight. I haven't really read through that yet, but he had suggested that maybe we work with you and talk about suggested changes that he had. One idea that Steve DiGiulio had mentioned talking about fees was that sometimes attorneys will have a flat rate and then extra for, I don't know, like extra jobs or extra things that come up. I don't know what that would be, but extra assignments or whatever. So I don't know. He just briefly mentioned that. So I don't know if he wanted to elaborate on that or if that's something that, I just thought I'd mention it, if it's something that was a possibility.
I'm happy to weigh in. It is not uncommon to have a base contract amount for a certain level of service. That is often more the case as a relationship has been established over time and the parties can better predict what the demand will be. I'm not in a position to judge whether that's in the best interest of the city or Madrona law at this point. The model that has been outlined for you is certainly a model that is employed by other communities. But in response to a question, I did say that there are some approaches where there is a base amount provided for a certain number of hours, and then is, Ms. Kiefer says it's a la carte beyond that. But that's another model that is available. But again, I don't have any particular observation of whether or not that's in the best interest of the city of Duval at this time.
Any other questions, Michelle? Eileen, you have a feedback on that? Go ahead.
Just a little bit. I mean, I don't think we have a proposal for a flat rate proposal for Duval. But just one thing to keep in mind is that typically under flat fees, they can be overutilized in some months and underutilized in some months. So for example, where I've heard clients complain that they're underutilizing the flat fee is in the summer when folks are on vacation and you're having fewer council meetings, and then December, because December is usually fairly slow. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. We're certainly flexible, and we want you guys to feel like you have the right level of service at the right price. But just an observation from past clients and past input from them.
Thank you. Other questions? Just so all council members know, I think it was on Friday, our Finance Administration Committee. Councilmember Lengo, I'll let you go ahead here. You have a question? I think you're still on mute.
Yeah,
There you go.
I think I've printed out every draft of this contract that's been transmitted by email. What's a little confusing right now is which draft we're looking at for Madrona. I'm not talking about the template, because there was the contract that was introduced with the bill at the last meeting. There's been some drafts and some supplemental information provided since then. And then there's what Steve just sent us. So what I need to know is what is the final proposal for Madrona? Because as I said, I mean, what Finance and Administration did was look at the contract in the context of a template that would work for either Madrona or any attorney, because investing in a contract development is expensive and we want a template that will serve us over time. But specific to Madrona, we've had so many drafts now, and drafts are not necessarily labeled in terms of sequence or redlined. I want to be sure I'm looking at the final contract. Is that the one that Steve just sent us?
Yes, that's the one that the council members that contacted Steve had suggested changes, and we worked with Madrona to get that done today. And the previous version that you received on Friday was a result of conversations with Councilmember Hogue, and that's in which the contract is reviewed in January of 21 and expires in March unless the council extends it. So all of council's requests plus the additional conversations with council members on Friday, and then the conversation that council members have had with Steve DiGiulio are all included in the contract that was sent this afternoon.
Okay, well, I was involved in that meeting, and there were refinements after meeting with him that aren't in this draft. So they aren't, massive necessarily, but they are somewhat process oriented. The issue of attendance at council meetings was discussed. What I just printed out from Steve does not include the scope of work Exhibit A. So I would need to see because that is something we talked about in terms of tightening some of that up, so there weren't duplicate information there. So I need to know what the final Exhibit A will be. Another thing that was discussed after that, which I don't think it's major necessarily, is the issue of travel. because we're, learning that Zoom can be an efficient way for people to attend remotely. That also saves us money. That's something we would want to make sure we've addressed. Some of the final language, the reason why I was off video is I wanted to listen at the same time I reviewed what he sent over. There's been an ongoing, I think, misunderstanding about professional liability insurance. When I mentioned a $4 million number in my conversations with Mayor Pro Tem Remington, this is quite some time ago, it wasn't in reference to commercial liability insurance. It was related to professional liability insurance. And the reason I was asking for $4 million is that the $3 million limit was what was in the Kenyon Deason contract back in 2012, I believe. Also, I reviewed several attorney contracts for other cities going through our growth patterns, and $4 million is the more typical amount of professional liability. And then there's other, if I'm working from the Steve DiGiulio contract, there's refinements, but we just got it. So I can't compare it to even what our list of questions. We had, I think, 8 areas of questions. He gave us good guidance on that. He gave us good guidance on some other things that were related, but to attorney services in general. So I guess I'll end there and say, I need a final scope of work, first of all, to be sure I've got the final one there, which is Exhibit A to the contract. And then, I probably would have some other comments on this in areas that are important to me.
Well, thank you, Dot.
Share a copy of that contract and highlight the issues I addressed. The council member is correct that I have not addressed Exhibit A scope of work. Did not expect that I'd be asked to engage in that drafting.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just trying to reconcile what I'm looking at. No, we didn't ask you to revise scope of work. So I just want to know what we would be including in that. And I do think substantial progress has been made on the contract. I think given past discussions, we are very, very close on a template, which is what we really discussed with you primarily from my perspective.
Well, thank you, Dot. Councilmember Hoag.
I just had a comment about Exhibit A. If I remember right, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but if I remember right, I think there are some areas that needed to be cleaned up because it talked about how many times you'd be attending a meeting, and one of the areas said all meetings and one said once a month, and it wasn't consistent or clear. So I wondered if it could be cleaned up. That was the only, and I don't have it in front of me to be specific.
Mm-hmm.
So do you remember that, Jennifer?
I do. There were, in the scope section of attachment A, items 1 and 3 was referring to meetings in attendance, and those 2 items contradict each other. And then it also was in the specifications section that also brought up a bunch of things that were repeated multiple times that contradicted other things in other sections, and just a lot of duplication of information. And then the other thing that was in the scope that we had questions about were the merit or necessity of having the qualification section. It felt like it was just something copied out of the RFP, and it seemed a little odd that in the scope of work, we would have a list of qualifications. And we discussed potentially moving that to the body of the contract, just to mention that, of the attorneys that will serve us, they will have, certain qualifications, but just it seemed a little odd, all the sections within scope of work that, anyway, it just felt like it needed to be a little bit cleaned up. But were you done, Michelle? Because I did have a question, but I want you to finish. Okay.
She's done. So Michelle, you had your hand up, so you're welcome to move forward. Councilmember Naplin.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So I had a couple, one question for Eileen and then just a general kind of comment question. So what do you consider your role as the city attorney? There are other attorneys in your firm. And so one of the questions was, is your role as city attorney the person who comes to the meeting and random questions get asked, but other work is all assigned to other attorneys? Like, I want to understand how much of the work is going to be done by yourself versus potentially attorneys we've used in the past that are now at Madrona.
I'm happy to answer that. If I'm able to do it, if I have the time and the expertise to do it, I'm going to be doing it. If I'm your day-to-day city attorney, I'm not just going to be the face that you see at the council meetings. You're going to be receiving memos from me. Staff is going to be working with me. You're going to be, seeing a lot of me and hearing a lot from me. And so we would delegate. I would delegate when I didn't have time or the expertise. But I would propose to treat you the way I treated North Bend when I was their city attorney, which is I did the vast majority of the day-to-day. And if there was something that I just lacked the capacity or the expertise to do, I would pass that off. But I'm just trying to even give you like a percentage, would be like 80, 85%, maybe even higher than that would be, I would expect to perform myself as opposed to handing off to others. That said, I mean, we do collaborate a lot of like Kim Adams Pratt, who she's our land use guru. So sometimes it might be cheaper for you guys if I just ask her, hey, Kim, can I run this by you? In which case I would certainly do that because it's going to be cheaper and faster. But otherwise I'm going to be, trying to handle the majority of it myself.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then I just wanted to mention, this is more just addressing the general counsel, is we did have a discussion with Steve DiGiulio. We came up with some ideas to address questions we had. And what we were hoping to do was come back to council and kind of have a more holistic conversation that we've never had with the entire council and pinpoint how we might want to change it. But we didn't necessarily expect that all the changes would be put into the contract. So that just came at the last minute. And so I was I'm trying to reorient myself about where we're at because, that was 3 council members just trying to understand what our options would be. And we really wanted to have an open conversation with the rest of council about how you felt about things. So, I mean, I guess it's great that now it's somewhat implemented. There's a few things that we talked about that aren't in there as Councilmember Langell mentioned. So I'm just trying to understand what is the expectation of this meeting, because really, I think what's frustrating is the point of the COW is to really have a conversation about this. And all these individual conversations or pieces of conversations that are now in this contract, I don't know that it feels a little backwards. It feels like we should have had a conversation about these ideas. So now I feel like we have a full proposal. Anyway, what is the expectation for this meeting, I guess? I thought we were, anyway.
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is certainly this is our council's opportunity, Jennifer, to talk about the contract, because we do have that on city council meeting as well. But there are a lot of moving pieces. I think the mayor had sent us an update. Mr. DiGiulio had sent one this afternoon. There's still ongoing discussions. So I think it's, I'm just getting the sense from council that there's still a lot of questions and some work to be done. I can't speak for everybody, so we'll have to talk about that. But part of the goal is to continue to move this forward. We've touched it 2 or 3 times, but the more we touch it, it seems like there's more things, more feedback, more input, updates on the contract. I think Dot put it real well. There's a bunch floating out there, and it's sometimes hard to know exactly what we're looking at today.
Right. And it's not like it's a red line, so I even know exactly what's changed. So I'm sitting there trying to look at both and be like, well, what's changed? What's different?
And Mr. DiGiulio had mentioned that,
I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see the red line so we know what's changed. So Councilmember Brudnicki and then Councilmember Lango. And I think Mayor had some feedback as well. So we'll try to get all three of you here. Councilmember Brudnicki.
Yeah, so I was not one of those in that group of three. So I'm trying to catch up here. And I'm referring to the contract that I read that was attached to my packet. So I'm understanding there's probably a new version of that. Am I correct?
Yes.
And so I just had a question. I guess this would be for any of the legal here. In section 10, it talked, or it mentions the, I don't have the document in front of me because I'm on a Zoom call, but it mentions that I believe council can terminate the contract. And I just was wondering with their law firm, and I was just wondering if that was a normal, that's normal. Is that a normal policy that cities practice?
You take that one?
Yeah, Mr. DiGiulio, go ahead.
Yeah.
Section 10, it talks about, I think as I understand it, that a council can terminate the contract with legal. So I was just wondering if that was normal for a city like ours with our sort of structure.
So Steve, we have your screen up now.
We have yours.
So we're looking at section 10, termination.
The answer is yes, that is common. In fact, under the rules of professional conduct that governs the attorney's practice in the state of Washington, the client can fire the attorney at any time, and the attorney can resign representation at any time, subject only to certain responsibilities with respect to ongoing litigation matters. But the relationship is such a trust relationship that under the rules of court, you can fire your lawyer at any time and the lawyer can resign the representation at any time. So this is a standard, this provision is standard. You see it in many city attorney contracts, and it is a standard service contract provision that you find in the professional services contracts. So there's nothing particularly unusual about this, except that there is a right by either party to terminate the contract at any time.
So Steve, a little nuance, I'll ask it in a different way. And this may be what Diane was getting to. So we understand that portion that either side can terminate. I think Diane was trying to ask, would that normally fall under the mayor or city council to be able to make that decision to cancel a contract?
Well, it is because, and this, I think some of you have heard me talk about this before. This is one of the disputes that has occurred in communities around the state over the years, the Benton City being the principal example of that. And because this is a contract with the city, the question here is whether or not it should be terminated exclusively by the mayor or by the city council as well. Now, the authority to appoint includes the authority to terminate. The difficulty here is that this is not so much an appointment as it is a contract, and because the council has contract authority, the council, as I understand it, wishes to have this authority to act on termination decisions, and hence this provision is included in here. Other contracts may simply reference terminated by the city without reference to whether it's the city attorney, or excuse me, the city council or the mayor. But my understanding is that this section was made specific to highlight that it would be by the city council in order that it was clear that it was the city council and not the mayor. And again, I don't have the background for that, but there's certainly nothing out of the ordinary about this provision.
Diane, did that answer your question okay?
It did. I guess my concern was in the past working on city council, I just get a little concerned about the politics that could creep into that kind of decision making. And I didn't know if there's some sort of thing for protection so that we don't ever go down that kind of road, but I guess there isn't. So.
Well, the thing, Steve,
It is, you are a political body. Whether it is just a fact of government, that's what we have.
I think, Steve, at our last meeting, you commented about something that really stuck home for me, and that's that you really want to be working together with the mayor and the council in collaboration on these issues and not do it alone. And I would hope that regardless, we would always be working together in that regard if a contract was to be terminated. So I appreciate your feedback on this. Councilmember Langall and then Mayor Okerlander.
Thanks. At the last council meeting, one of the reasons I asked for these two decisions, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of the reasons I asked for these two things to be bifurcated, meaning Madrona's contract versus a template, is because integral to that is how we make decisions around professional services. And yes, at the last meeting, Steve was very clear that the ultimate contracting authority, in the end of the day, rests at council. The reason some of the things we have been discussing are important is to avoid a situation, creating a little more structure in our professional relationships between council and administration so that disputes that would end up in situations where the council is not served at all, in particular, could be avoided. And so that's kind of the little background on why I wanted these two things separated. And so it would not, so a template would be accepted and keep it out of a specific decision where other information is relevant. So that's that one. And then the other thing is there, and we talked about this in the meeting last Friday with Mr. DiGiulio, is that, there is case law of situations where councils got into such horrible disputes that the courts said it was okay for councils to have independent counsel. I don't think I've heard anyone on council say that is desirable or where this activity that we've been working on in the last couple of weeks is where we're trying to go. I want to be sure everybody, I just haven't heard that. To me, that's like the most horrible thing and last resort a city could end up in. So just having a clear termination authority at the end of the day and processes in between that promote communication between administration and council are more likely to end up in that collaborative decision one way or the other. And that's the kind of language, after speaking with Mr. DiGiulio, those were the kind of refinements, at least I'm looking for in any contract. So there is more consultation between the bodies on several matters, not just termination.
Well, thank you.
And we have made tremendous progress. I think we have to celebrate a second that we are making tremendous progress and understanding these interrelationships in a legal contract.
I do think it's important to pause and recognize the mayor brought forward the new language. I think most everything that council had asked for was incorporated, and I really appreciate that. I don't think we stopped to recognize that enough. Mayor Okerlander, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, make clear, we not only changed that termination provision and did everything that council asked that was legal within the last meeting that we had, that we also put a check-in that is very much like an employee performance review in January. And I do have concerns. We've made a lot of progress. That said, I'm learning again at a council meeting about discussions that were had and proposals that were made that were not brought to me, that we could have perhaps brought forth options of language to discuss this evening if I had been included in that conversation. So the conversation that I was included with when Councilmember Hogue and I spoke last week, you know, is something that we actually came up with that through a conversation together and put it in the contract with the knowledge that that might help. It might not be everything that council wants, but that would help help council feel more comfortable. And so I would ask, you know, again, this is taking a lot of time in the middle of the pandemic, and it is important that if you have continued changes that you'd like to make, please don't just consult with Mr. DiGiulio. Please contact me, because if it's something that I can easily agree to, it's more likely that if you're agreeing to it, council may agree to it as well. And we can have that prepared in advance of the meeting. But getting word of changes the day of the meeting is why you got a new contract this afternoon. And so I just want to, again, respectfully request that this stuff, it's been 2 weeks since the last meeting, that these changes, you know, continue to work with Mr. DiGiulio to come up with these ideas, but then please come and talk to me so that we can make sure that we have the materials ready for council, because if we are not aware of it, we can't be prepared. And we use a lot of, I heard some questions about council this evening, do we need to have an attorney at every meeting? You know, that's really, you know, ultimately an administrative call, and it typically depends on what's going on with the body. You know, we need to have this stuff in advance so that we can have it prepared for the packet for the council discussions. So again, we're now paying, you know, I'm so thankful for Mr. DiGiulio's assistance with this challenging issue. But if I had known that there were additional amendments that council was talking about today beyond what was already sent to me, we could have worked this out alongside and saved a significant amount of legal cost time as well. So that's just, I just want to put that out there as, you know, we're trying to get this done. We've got a lot of things to get done, and we have made a lot of progress. And if we can get to the final point by the next meeting, that would be very helpful to staff in particular. And I think in all fairness to all the legal counsel involved in the process. So I just, you know, want to share that. It's not trying to be negative. It's just trying to express the reality of the situation, that if somebody had called me today and said there was a list of things, then I could have had a conversation. And because it's the legal contract, I would have made that a priority today and canceled some other meetings. So I just want to, you know, please reiterate that we really, really need to have this information in advance so that we can do the work necessary before having a council discussion, so that you have the information that you need as a group and people don't have to find out about it on the same evening.
Mayor, thank you. I think points well taken, and we understand the importance of trying to be open in our communications. I do recognize that the committee had the opportunity Friday, so there hasn't been much time in between. And I do know the committee is real committed to coming before council, usually at the COW, to discuss these. Some of this is just plain logistics. We don't get a lot of time to see each other since we only meet every 2 weeks. So there are logistical challenges that all of us face. Councilmember Hogue, did I see you had your hand up?
I do want to thank you, Mayor. I appreciated being able to have a conversation with you and brainstorm. And that's when we came up with the, you know, talking about possibly making it short term so we can make, because we don't know Eileen very well. So it's like we can give Eileen a chance and try and see, you know, and I appreciate you taking the time to discuss that with me. And I appreciate you working with the attorneys and making changes to the contract. Even if we had had the other changes that we've talked about that are left, that are very minor, we wouldn't have probably been able to vote on it because the rest of the council hasn't dug into it yet. You know, they really haven't seen it yet and don't know really what the changes are. I'm trying to understand them myself, and I was at those meetings. So I was kind of, what I was hoping we could do to move forward is if maybe, if council wanted the finance committee to meet with Eileen, we're willing to do that, but we would want council's input of the current contract so that we could maybe meet with Eileen and talk and work through, because I think all that's left is just minor little things that wouldn't be a problem. But that's just my thought. I think we're very close to getting it ready for an approval.
Yeah,
So,
it certainly sounds like that. I wanted to give other council members opportunity. I really appreciate our 3 council members on the Finance Administration Committee working very hard on this, along with the attorneys. Appreciate the patience of Madrona as we work through this. But I do want to give opportunity for our other council members who are not on the committee. Do you have any questions? Is there an expectation you have about what information you need to be able to move this forward? Councilmember McHenry and then Councilmember Brudnicki.
Thank you. So I think that for me at least, I'd like to see, I would be okay with the Finance Committee working on that, but I'd also like to be kept in the loop just to make sure that we get to see a sneak peek of what it'll look like after that work before the meeting and have a chance to dig into it. Because like for me, you were talking about additional items that you might want to tweak or change, but it would be good to know. I don't know, I'm trying to figure out a way to do this, but it's so tough with the timing because, I mean, before we put the work into actually changing the contract, because I don't know how long that takes to see what council's temperature is on that before we do that. So I don't know if that's something easily done within the COW now, if you have a list, or if you haven't had time to look through the current version of the contract and figure out what hasn't quite made it in there yet. I don't know if you have a response to that, Michelle, or anyone else.
Can I say something just quickly? Is that when I sent the contract out on Thursday, we highlighted the changes in that email to council. And when the changes were made on Friday, we highlighted that as well. A memo did not go out about the last change, but my suspicion is that Mr. DiGiulio can explain that pretty clearly for the council. And if folks want to pull up their email and look at those changes, it should be pretty simple to do at this point.
But I think there were a couple more changes that someone just referenced wanting to make, or did I mishear that?
Yes, but we can discuss the other ones.
Yeah. Councilmember Brudnicki. And then Councilmember Langle.
So, I don't know, it's been a while now. We've been discussing this, but prior to all this discussion, I was in favor of the contract. And so I kind of stand there at the same spot that I was weeks ago. But I did understand that there were a lot of questions and the committee had to meet and ask these questions and vet them. And so I'm just looking for the staff, the mayor, and the people who are still undecided to work through this. Now I'm a little confused because I thought I'd looked at the final thing, but I guess I didn't. And when I read through the contract, my only thought was if the staff and the mayor seem to have come to an agreement on the contract, then I'm going to support that. And I really don't have to have any further discussion or meetings regarding it, but if other folks do, I can certainly understand that. But it is a time-sensitive issue, and I think we should figure out today how we're going to manage it so that we can finally come to a conclusion on it.
Councilmember Langle, and then I think Councilmember Napland has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something. We had our meeting with Mr. DiGiulio at 4:30 on Friday, and that was approximately 2 hours. As he explained in his transmittal, there was a technology glitch, which resulted in us just getting the document we received today at the, just shortly, really a couple hours before our meeting today. So we were hesitant as a group to start putting more versions of a contract out there because it does get very confusing for everyone. But Mayor, I want to assure you that that was not in any way intentional to leave you out of the loop. It was a sequence of events, nothing more than that. So I don't want you to think that that was some intentional thing. And to answer Councilmember McHenry's statement, and maybe Jennifer was going to do this, but I'll just say it for myself, which is the reason we are talking as a group, talking to all of you on CAL tonight, is we did not want to presume that we should be doing any more discussion around any document without you feeling like that's what you want to do. Because in the past, what we've said about some things, not all things, some things is the final, as in even deliberation, not even just final, but deliberation would just occur at the CAL, and specifically budget has been discussed in that. So we wanted to be sure that if we did more work on this, that was okay with all of you. We didn't want to seem rogue and, you know, keep working on something. So with what we have from Mr. DiGiulio, I concur with my colleagues. I think this can be wrapped up and come to CAL for whatever final reviews and all that in plenty of time prior to any other packet, even for you to review and do with it whatever you want to do with it.
Thank you. Councilmember Naplin, and then Councilmember Iyer.
So I'll try to be quick, but the meeting we had on Friday, the reason it was the three of us on the finance committee is because of OPMA, and we'd already had conversations, so we wanted to keep it to us. It wasn't that the finance committee was making a proposal and going to, you know, make all these recommendations, spend staff time, attorney time to implement them and provide a contract to recommend. That was not the intent of the meeting. It wasn't the intent of the finance committee to do that. What it was is the three of us had already had a conversation, so we felt like to save time and money, we would all have the conversation with Steve DiGiulio at the same time, so we wouldn't be, you know, having multiple conversations. Out of that, I took notes of the areas that we talked about, and the intent was to bring it to council, say, here's the areas we talked about. How do you feel about it? Before we spent additional money trying to get them implemented. And the recommendation was that we could potentially use Eileen, if we felt comfortable with these ideas, to include them in the contract, get everyone on the same page. Maybe the recommendations we had, no one else agrees with. We didn't know that. We didn't want to spend additional money trying to integrate all of these ideas. And so it wasn't out, you know, I feel like now we're in trouble for costing more money and having this last minute rush, but really the intent was that we would come forth with the areas we had questions about, the answers from Steve DiGiulio, and his recommendations say, do you want us to move forward with drafting language that will address these, and then potentially use Eileen, and then a final review by Steve. That is what we talked about. I'm happy to share our notes from that conversation, but until today, I could not find out how other council members felt, because I can't go and call you, I can't send you my notes, like, I had to wait until tonight. And so tonight is our chance to talk about the different things that we thought maybe could be tweaked on the contract. And that's what I thought we were going to do, is this time was we were going to try to come up with a template that had the ideas that we felt comfortable with, and we were going to decide on the general template. But now we're looking again at a Madrona specific contract, and my brain is all swirling around. So that's why, once again, what is the purpose of this meeting? Are we going to try to come up with a template? If so, I'm happy to read all the areas that were discussed and the recommendations and ideas that were given to us, because this wasn't a finance committee proposal. This was us getting information that we wanted to bring back to council so we could all have a conversation before implementing.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. You're not in trouble, first of all.
No. No, my point was just simply that it's been 2 weeks since the last meeting. So I'm just asking council to be a little more expedient in having those meetings. And I did, of course, encourage you to do that. And I'm very thankful that you did. But just so that we can, can start to get to the closer to the finality of the process. So no, I'm thrilled that you guys did have been talking to Eileen and that you have been talking to Mr. DiGiulio. I'm just trying to kind of help folks be a little more cognizant of the timeframes that we need. And it is okay for council members to share their notes with me. I can have talks with the attorney and staff There's a lot of things that can be done as far as simply just doing pages of amendments that can be discussed, prior to the council discussion, and make sure there's buy-off from administration and attorney that doesn't violate the OPMA, but yet still provides that opportunity for the council to pick and choose what you would actually like included. So just to be clear, it's just a timing issue. And again, I'm very thankful that folks went and have been reaching out and doing due diligence on this contract.
Councilmember Iyer and then Councilmember McHenry.
I feel like many of the changes that have been incorporated are, on the right track in terms of, addressing concerns and getting at just general concerns that it was my impression that council had. So in that regard, I feel like it's a positive, and I want to encourage the general esprit de corps that's occurring, and that we move forward with that in mind, because I think in terms of the contract template in the contract, it sounds like we're really close. So I just hope we don't get too mired in the last bit of details, because I think the broad strokes have been effectively inserted. That being said, I do feel strongly that council does have a role as a representative body of the citizens to have an informed opinion about things, and so I think I commend my fellow council members for leaning into this process. And democracy is an experiment sometimes, and you try things and see how they work. And I appreciate the mayor's openness to also be, open-minded to the process. And I always come back to, I frequently, wouldn't say I'm a Republican or anything, and I don't go around quoting Ronald Reagan or anything, but I think trust yet verify is something that I always think of in my professional life, and in council, I think it's very important. So I feel like the levers are there, and I feel like in terms of the contract, I think it addressed some concerns that council has. So I would encourage us to hammer out the small details of the sounding of the scope to clean it up, and then just clean up the last few details. My comments in regards to timing and billing, I was kind of jumping ahead of my thought has been more focused. My guts have been consumed by this process, and my head has been consumed by the budget process. And I think trying to identify ways that we can reduce our costs. And I think in one of my conversations with Mr. DiGiulio, is just exploring the options of how frequently we have legal counsel on site present. I was, as we were going through this conversation, I was thinking, at the future council meetings, that every council meeting that we don't ask a question of legal, I will say, okay, here's one that we could have gone without. Not to say that it's not important to have on hand when we need it, but it's mostly a cost savings thought. So with that, I will let us move on.
Thank you. Councilmember McHenry.
I just wanted to kind of circle back a bit, and from what I'm hearing, there's still a few details to be hammered out, but I wanted to make sure that if we go forward with the finance committee helping wrap that up, do you, as a finance committee, do you have everything you need right now from council? Because it sounded like you had a list of things maybe that hadn't quite made it onto the latest edit. So I just want to make sure that we're giving you everything that you would need to do that.
One of our, Dot, go ahead.
Well, ironically, one of the things that we want to talk about is actually with Mayor Pro Tem Remington. And it's a process question, and we haven't really had a chance to talk with him about that. And we want to make sure that the process that is potentially used is something that can flow from him all the way through council, not necessarily at a cow, but getting a temperature of council, which is his job, right? Is that we want him to serve us as council members as well as serve the city as a whole and be the conduit for information with the mayor. So we want to make sure that piece, which affects 3 sections in the contract, we want to make sure that works. So that's an example of a tweak. It's not a massive tweak. It's just more procedure, how that procedure is built into the contract. That's a pretty small thing in the scheme of things because it's 3 sections. It would all be handled the same way. Does that help you out a little bit? I mean, that's how minor it is in terms of the contract language, but that's how important it is in terms of how we move towards a different working relationship around legal services.
Anyone else on finance administration? I'd like to make a suggestion. Matt, did you have your hand up? Another question?
I just wanted to generally support as well. Some of these details can be tedious, and most of the time you don't need them, but you're thankful that they're there when you do need them and you need clarification. And it's helpful to have process. So I mean, I would just generally be in support of outlining things that get past the gray areas.
Thank you. Councilmember Naplin, so you have that list, is that right?
I just emailed it to everyone. I can also screen share it. It looks like most of the ideas were implemented. It's up to you if you want to go through it right now really quickly. I think most of them were implemented. It's up to you. It's just a little over 1 page.
Well, let me make a suggestion. We only have about 15 minutes left. We've got a couple of topics, but we may wind up pushing those onto council if that works for the mayor as well.
Absolutely.
So this is really critical. I don't think we have time to spend half hour or so in a discussion, but if we could look at the list, and my suggestion would be council members that want feedback and can call and talk to our finance administration committee, mayor. I'm more than comfortable with that group working out the language. And if we could get a final draft template that we could send out to council early enough, so if council continues to have questions, we could call back and ask, and if not, we can move forward our next meeting. If that works for everybody, we could go ahead and Jennifer, you could go over that list real quickly with us. And if you can bring it up on the screen for everybody to see, that would be helpful.
Sure. Okay, let's see. Screen share. Where was that? I know I've seen it. Where's the screen share?
Down at the bottom, a green button.
Share screen. Let's see. I think that's the right one. Can you see it?
There it is.
Okay. So the first, we had a question really quick. What's the difference between professional services contract or a legal services contract? Apparently, effectively the same. It's a preference that doesn't necessarily have any meaning. The question of there's references to attorney and then the firm, and it was kind of used interchangeably. And Steve DiGiulio said, yeah, better to be consistent, but an easy way to fix it is to just, in your opening paragraph, equate the two, that it's the same thing. So we did, I believe that's been implemented. The scope section, it just felt like there were some duplicates. It was trying to be very exhaustive, and is that necessary to try to think of every single possible task, or is it better to be more general? Apparently it's kind of a style decision, but you probably should clean up things that are contradictory, like the meeting attendance. In one, it says you need to attend all. In others, it was, once a month. And then the qualification section was just, potentially a little odd to be in the scope, and maybe that sections of that qualification that could be ongoing requirement of the contract, that any attorney serving under the contract would need certain things, that could be moved to the body rather than the scope potentially. Let's see, in the scope, there was something about, in one of the items, it talked about the firm requesting scope changes and it needing to be approved by city council. And the reason that needs to be in there, and it should be in there and it's appropriate, is that we wouldn't want the firm to change the scope and start doing work that isn't within the scope and then get billed for it. So it's just a check to make sure any change of scope is approved by city council and the firm can't on its own expand its scope. And then attorneys included in the contract. We had a question, it clearly outlined who the city attorney was and the backup, but does that expand to others? And so the conversation we had is that if additional attorneys were to be used, that there would be a conferring with the mayor pro tem before utilizing other attorneys potentially. And I think that portion of that language is in there. And so, I think it was just checks and balances of who is really working. Because I do like the idea of having one primary attorney doing most of the work so it's not disjointed. But that's just my personal preference and not really in the notes. There was a question about as administered by the mayor, and that Steve DiGiulio assured that that is legally accurate, that is that position, is overseen by the mayor, and potentially we would add some language that would include conferring with the mayor pro tem on the management of the position, just to be more inclusive. And I believe that might be in. I'm still trying to track down what got in. And then the termination clause, we just wanted to make sure, is this normal? Have you seen other city councils be in charge of the termination? And it sounded like, cities do it all different ways. It wouldn't be unusual to have city council be that the termination decider. And it still allows the mayor to bring forward, hey, this isn't working for me. I think we should do something different. And then the council can proceed at that point. So it does give the mayor an opportunity to say, hey, this isn't working. So the assignment and subcontract without written consent of the city. There's a question about, how that would work. If we would want, and this was the section that didn't get put in. And so I'll ask everyone how they feel. So would you want the Madrona or whoever ends up getting this contract, would you want them to subcontract and then bill us without having some kind of approval by city council, or what does the city mean, and kind of try to clarify that? And so
I think I can help with that one pretty quickly, Councilmember Knappman, if you'll let me. In the conversations, and in my experience, city attorneys don't subcontract out with other firms unless it's the city subcontracting out. So for example, the city of Duval, historically we've used Summit Law for employment when it's beyond the firm that we're using. That does require the firms to work together because your city attorney needs to be directly involved in that and know what's going on, even if it's been subcontracted out. But that subcontracting typically happens at the city level, and same has happened with McCormick Keating Buckland. If I'm getting their name wrong, I always get it mixed up. And that is, I don't have any issue with that being in the provision, because I know that that's not typical of the firms anyways. But if it makes people feel more comfortable, I am completely okay with that. And I just want to say that all the other stuff, it's small and it's easy and it's fine. So, okay. It's just some small, to your point, small technicalities that are cleaning up what council wants to see that makes council feel more comfortable. And what I've seen so far, I don't have any issues with whatsoever.
Okay. So the reason we brought that up is that we want transparency of what attorneys are we using, right? And so we wouldn't want to have you be using a whole nother attorney firm as a subcontract and it not to be transparent of who is serving us.
Yeah.
And so that's why we said we can either take out the assignment and subcontract and say it's not allowed, because normally we do contract directly anyway, or we would say it needs to come through city council, so at least there'd be some transparency
Yeah.
in the subcontracting. So
And that's completely okay. And normally what you would see if that were an allowance in a contract is that would show up on your billing statements, because they have to, you know, attorneys bill based on who does per hour. But yeah, I'm totally good with that. It's just a clarification, and if the rest of the group's amenable to everything that I've seen so far, I'm happy to get those changes made by the next meeting.
and the final one was kind of the same thing about being able to modify it. It was currently just signed by the parties, and we didn't know what that meant. The parties, I think technically is the city. What does that mean? We just want to make sure that we worked really hard on this contract. If it gets modified, we want to know. We want
Oh,
to
yeah.
it. And so that's why we said change it to as, it would need to be approved by city council, just because we worked so hard on the contract. We don't want to have it change if we don't know about it.
Yeah, and that's pretty standard right now in a contract of this size, is that amendments and changes to the contract do have to come to council for change,
Okay.
just like in some of our construction change orders. So it's not necessary, but it's fine.
Yeah, and I think part of it was that the reason that might be necessary is our current contracting code potentially says that certain changes are allowed by administration. And so since that hasn't been clarified exactly how that works, that it would be better potentially to have that explicitly said in the contract, that
that's fine.
if you're going to change it, it comes through council so that we know our contract is changing. And then the other recommendations, yeah, is that some of these things could be resolved by changing our contracting section of the DMC, but you know, since we don't have that done, some of these changes should be done to address those.
Yeah, that's a whole big issue that we internally want to get addressed.
So I mean, everyone else can read the last little bit. Those were just some other kind of things that came up. But so I don't know if anyone has any comments on any of these things, but that was our conversation. We really wanted to present it to council before we, you know, necessarily went to a bunch of work, you know, making this all happen, because we want it to be collaborative.
Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, thank you for going over that for council. I think that's really helpful to get us all on board, including the mayor and staff. I still think at this point we're better off to have the committee continue to work with the mayor and then present the rest of council with kind of that final, well, can't call it final necessarily, but the next draft so we can take a look at it. I was asked a question about Mayor Pro Tem, and I'm only Mayor Pro Tem till the end of the year, so I'm probably answering for the next Mayor Pro Tem. But certainly I can talk to the mayor about some of the logistics on those particular items. You know, it really is just discussing and making sure changes that relate to legal services is discussed with council as well. And I'm always happy to bring back those items to council, either as advisory to get feedback. And like I say, this is one of the more important contracts a city has, and we want to get that template right and then move into being able to say, you know, who would we select for legal services. So I think we're on track. I really appreciate not only the amount of hard work by the mayor and staff and our own finance administration committee members, but I recognize that these things have a certain amount of emotional and can wear you out physically and mentally. And you know, there's a lot going on with these, a lot of language changes. What are the effects? What are we trying to accomplish? And I just want to end by saying, you know, we're doing this for our citizens, for our city. It's worth that effort and work. And as Matt said, it's sometimes messy being in government, but I appreciate the hard work that's been done, especially seeing things advanced. I get frustrated when we put in a lot of work and there's no advancement, but here we clearly see some positive advancement. It's taken a lot of patience on a lot of folks, so I appreciate that. Mayor, do you concur that if we have you work with the committee members and work on a draft language to send that back to council here in the next week or so, that we could have that ready for our next meeting?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, those are easy things. I think, well, I just have to confirm Madrone is good with those changes. But they're easy. It's, cleaning up some language. It's completely fine, and I don't have any issue with. We can probably actually get it hammered out tomorrow and out to council tomorrow afternoon, depending on staff time. And so then, if there's any issues that come up between now and Friday, that would be great so that we have time to work it out. Sorry.
Member Lingle.
I have to help build a fence tomorrow. So I would appreciate Thursday if I could possibly work on this Thursday or.
Yeah, we'll send Advil tomorrow for you.
That must be your project with your husband you were talking about earlier today.
No, it's at my son's house.
Oh.
I don't even benefit from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to.
So I was just going to say with that point too, since we have a consensus here with some of those, it seems that we have a consensus with some of those final changes. I'll go ahead and pull that agenda item from the council meeting. I don't think we need to rehash the conversation that we've had here. And then we will put it on the committee of the whole for the next meeting and hopefully final approval for the next council meeting.
Well, thank you, Mayor. So our last two items, the flood insurance rate map and the coronavirus update. Mayor, with your concurrence, we'll move those to our council meeting.
Absolutely. And clerk, I did not receive a paper with the, oh, you know what? Just found it. I was trying to find the additions and corrections. So I've got that ready to go, and I'm not working off 2 computer screens tonight, so it should be a lot easier.
Well, finally, before I end, I do want to thank Eileen again for being here, introducing yourself and letting us ask some questions. Anne Marie as well. Thank you for your patience as we work on this process. And Mr. DiGiulio, I can't tell you how much we as a council and city appreciate your expertise and stepping in to help us move this forward in a very positive way. So thank you for your expertise and advice.
Oh, you're on mute, Mr. DiGiulio. You're on.
I was happy to do so, and I'm happy to know that you're not going to need me at 7 o'clock.
Well, thank you, Steve. Well, with that and not seeing any other input, wanting to give ourselves a couple of minutes to get to our next meeting, the committee of the whole is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you over at our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DiGiulio.
Thank you.